Oh boy, do we get to talk about Alaska? Did you guys hear? Guys, the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. They're coming for our Alaska. Where's Sarah Palin when you need her? We need to like chain her up in a big tower at the top of it, and she can be like the Eye of Sauron guarding Alaska from the Russian Marines that are gonna be landing on the shores. I joke, but I do want to say there's only a 50-mile gap. People forget this. There's only a 50-mile gap between Alaska and Russia. Russia is closer to Alaska than Alaska is to the continental United States. So even though this is like, on its face, this story is ridiculous, it's silly, the idea of the Russians landing in Alaska and trying to take it over or acting upon the revocation of the legality of the 1867 sale of Alaska to the United States is ridiculous. So let me give you guys a rundown of Alaskan history real quick for those of you who don't know. So we bought Alaska from the Russians 2 years after the end of the Civil War in 1867. Now, the reason why we bought it from Alaska was the Russians, to be quite frank, didn't want it anymore. They had tried to colonize Alaska, but they had failed. They had failed to be able to do it, and it was taking too much resources and time, and so they were looking at it from like a sunk cost perspective, and they're like, look, we don't want to invest any more in this. We got our own problems over in Europe. We're trying to deal with some other stuff. We need to deal with these European affairs that are getting kind of crazy. Those Germans are popping off right now. We're pulling out. And we bought it from them for, I believe it was what, $5 to $10 million. I know in the today's value, if we were to take it and inflate it to today's value in currency, we're talking about $150 million. That's not bad when you think about it. $150 million for all of Alaska in modern monetary value. That's not a bad deal. It's not that much, really, when you think about it. But for the Russians, it was already a lost cause. It wasn't working. They were investing so much into it, so might as well get rid of it. By the way, I do want to say, before we get into the question of Russia revoking the legality of the 1867 sale, that if we're talking about this sale being immoral and illegal, or, you know, being able to be taken back, then wouldn't this also apply to other sales like the Louisiana Purchase, which covers, oh, God knows what, like 10, 12 different states? It was $2 million at the time. Thank you. I appreciate it. $2 million at the time, $150 million in today's currency. This precedent is silly. It's American and Russian relations are going downhill, so now this is becoming talked about again. Even though this isn't the first time Putin has talked about the revocation of the sale to Alaska, he was asked during one of his press conferences in 2012 by a Russian, some Russian ultranationalist, if they could take it back, and he was like, what? Why? No, he didn't say no directly, but he kind of looked at the Russian like he was a little crazy. Like, what are you at? No, what? I don't have the footage on me, but just know that this isn't the first time Putin has been asked about it. But let's talk about what's going on. So let's read this Newsweek article about what's going on, then look at some of the reaction and look at other examples of this being brought up. Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a new decree relating to Moscow's historic real estate holdings abroad, a move interpreted by ultranationalist bloggers as a foundation for future revisionist claims against Russia's neighbors and even the United States. The decree, signed by the president last week, allocates funds for search, registration, and legal protection of Russian property abroad, including property in the former territories of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. This would include Alaska, swaths of Eastern and Central Europe, large chunks of Central Asia, and parts of Scandinavia. Russia's foreign ministry and its presidential administration from property management enterprise are directed to carry out the work or to define, register, and protect property in question. The Institute for the Study of War noted that the exact parameters of what constitutes current or historical Russian property are unclear. The Kremlin may use the protection of its claimed property in countries outside of its internationally recognized borders to forward soft power mechanisms in post-Soviet and neighboring states ultimately aimed at internal destabilization. One prominent ultranationalist pro-war military blogger framed the decree as a step towards new territorial conflicts with Russian neighbors, including the United States. We suggest starting with Alaska, the two major Telegram channel with more than 530,000 subscribers wrote. Beyond that, the blogger wrote that the Kremlin should look to Dnieper, Ukraine, Barbarossa, the Great Duchy of Finland, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Central Asian states of Russian Turkestan, most of Baltic provinces, and a significant part of Poland. Wow. I think their eyes might be a little big for their stomach. Property can be searched both in the German Democratic Republic, we're all the way to Germany now, and in other Warsaw Pact countries, the channel wrote, referring to the Cold War era parts of Germany and other Central European nations under Soviet control. An expedition of combat legal defenders has already been sent for Africa, it added, perhaps a reference to Moscow's burgeoning Africa Corps. Okay, so let me be blunt with you guys about this story. Putin is not going to. I've had Alaskan fans message me and ask me if they should be scared. So let me just get this out of the way very quickly. Yes, you should be terrified. They're coming right now. No, don't. You're fine. The Russians are not going to be landing into Marines in Alaska. They're not going to bomb and raid Alaska. They're not doing anything there. You know, you might see something along the a line of like a spy balloon, or you might see something along the lines of putting their own spies, or more rhetoric and signed decrees like this. But the Russians are not going to be landing troops in Alaska anytime soon, and probably never. So the first reason is, to be blunt, the Russians are kind of preoccupied right now. Even if they wanted to, let's say that Putin himself was looking at Alaska, and every night he comes back, he puts his hand in his pants and massages at the idea of bringing back Alaska to the Russian Empire. Even if he wanted to, the vast majority of their combat-ready forces, outside of some National Guard units, are inside of Ukraine fighting the war. They are already scared of going through another wave of mobilization, since mobilization last time is the only time, when you look at Levada polling, that support for Putin's government significantly took a hit, a real hit. And the majority of Russians don't want another wave of mobilization. In fact, the majority of Russians are questioning when the war in Ukraine is going to end. So if the Russians have the vast majority of the resources and combat-ready soldiers, including non-combat-ready soldiers, preoccupied in Ukraine, as well as their air force and armor force, and they're using so many shells a day that they just can't keep up, even if their rate of fire is like 5 to 1 in comparison to the Ukrainians, how are they going to manage a landing of Alaska? Right? So on just a practical level, it doesn't make sense. That's not even talking about the quality of the American military. That's not even talking about the nuclear deterrent. That's not even talking about the complication of, invading Ukraine, that's an interconnected highway system, right? Russia and Ukraine has an interconnected highway system that Russia utilized to invade. That does not exist between Russia and Alaska. That does not exist. And lastly, this angle seems to be mostly taken, the angle of taking back Alaska seems to be mostly taken by Russian ultranationalists. Now, let me be clear. When I say that, that's not to say, oh, well, Putin hasn't endorsed the reclamation, therefore nobody serious believes it. It depends on what you mean by serious, right? Serious in the way that they are members of Putin's party, that they are elected, that they are in positions of power. Well, then yes, there are some serious people and ultranationalists who are actually, some of them jokingly, calling for some confrontation. Let me show you some examples. Here's Dmitry Medvedev, who is the former president of Russia, has been with Putin since his campaign in the 90s. And honestly, I think he's one of the last people, if not the last person, that was with Putin's campaign in the 90s that have still survived all the purges and haven't fled the country and is still working with him. He said, and he's the current Russian government official, according to a State Duma representative, and he's referencing another Russian government official who is in favor of this, Russia is not getting back Alaska, which was sold to the US in the 19th century. This is it then. And we've been waiting for it to be returned any day. Now war is unavoidable. Laughing crying emoji. Okay, so for Dmitry Medvedev, it's a you know, a little bit of a joke, maybe a little bit not of a joke, but it's mostly a joke. This is a sign from about a year and a half ago that was bought and purchased and put up by a Russian businessman. Alaska is ours. Alaska is ours. Now, let me be clear. This is a Russian businessman. This is not the Russian government. So this is not, again, the official position of the Russian government, but a Russian still did put this up. Now, this is Putin allies hinting at plots to reclaim Alaska. We could go through this and read all of it, but to give you a rundown, it's members of the State Duma who are getting kind of excited over the idea of taking back Alaska. There's articles both in 2022 in July near the start of the war where Putin allies, as tensions were escalating and people were talking about nuclear war, where Putin's allies in the Duma were talking about conquering Alaska. And we've had people recently talk about conquering Alaska again with this recent decree from the government. So it seems to be that the Russians haven't taken the official position of wanting to take back Alaska, and they don't have the ability to take back Alaska. So if you're in Alaska, you shouldn't be worried. But there are ultra-nationalists in Russia who do legitimately believe that they have as much of a right to Alaska as we do. There are people who legitimately believe that all the borders that Russia touches, you know, they're thin. And if Russia wanted to go over them and take more land, they could. When you hear people talking about dreams of Armenia and Azerbaijan and of this and of that and of Baltic countries and of all this, if they could, if these people could, if they had the means to, they would. They would. They absolutely would. They just don't, and probably never will. And so this will likely always stay a fantasy, thankfully. But now as an American, you have at least maybe like 1/100th of an idea of what it, since we are not in any actual position of fear over a Russian invasion, what it's like to see crazy ass claims of foreign territory from the Russians, your territory, just popping out of nowhere from historical conflicts that nobody is alive to even remember. Nobody who signed or was alive when Alaska, nobody that was even alive, even just born when Alaska was handed over, is alive today. So now you get a little bit of an idea what it's like to maybe be in Eastern Europe and out of nowhere, hey, maybe Russia owns this. Hey, maybe Russia owns that. All of a sudden, out of nowhere. Oh, there was a State Department response to this, though, which is funny that they actually had to do this.
Again, move to Russia, if I may. Putin apparently today signed an order declaring a 1983 sale of Alaska to the United States as illegitimate, quote unquote. Do you have a response to that?
Let me just understand that he signed something today that said the sale of Alaska is illegitimate.
Right.
Well, I think I speak for all of us in the U.S. government to say that certainly he is not getting it back.
Well, that's our response. It'll stay a dream, a strange dream, but a dream.